Hey everybody, it's Nick from Android Headlines, and today we're going to be taking the LG G5, the Nexus 6P, the Galaxy S7, and the HTC 10 in a head-to-head video challenge. So we're going to start off here with a little day walking scene. We've got a freeze frame here for you just to show you the immediate differences between the exposure balance, the color balance, and the lens types in each of the phones. You'll see the Nexus 6P is a little more zoomed in than those other phones. All these are set to 4K though, so they all should theoretically be the same resolution, the same everything. So we're going to put them head to head, and we're going to see what they look like now. So for this setup, we actually held all four phones side by side and took the scene at the exact same time with all four phones. So this is going to try to make up for any variations in lighting or other natural conditions that might affect the camera quality and the balance and the overall comparison that we were trying to get here. Because of this, you're going to notice some slight variations in angle, but this is to try to get the most accurate scene possible. This day walk scene is going to be testing that OIS built into a lot of these phones. What's really amazing to see here is just how incredibly stable the HTC 10's video is. HTC really does an amazing job with their optical image stabilization, particularly during the day. And although you can see a little bit of warping on all three phones with OIS, that's going to be the Galaxy S7, the G5, and the HTC 10 for note. The HTC 10 seems to have the most stable video and the least warping of the other ones. The G5 seems to come in second in this scenario, the S7 in third, and the 6P has no optical image stabilization, it only has digital, and it's really obvious. This scene is super shaky on the 6P. It almost looks ridiculous how shaky it is. I'm not running or anything, I'm just walking. So it seems sort of crazy just how unstable this is and what a huge difference OIS can make in the final image. Also taking a look at the exposure balance on all the phones, as well as the saturation and the color balance. What you're going to find here are that the Galaxy S7 and the LG G5 seem to be a little unrealistic in their saturation levels. They're a little bit deeper, a little bit richer, which is kind of more appealing to the eye, but it is definitely unrealistic. The HTC 10 is much closer to what real life actually looks like, with the Nexus 6P sort of being in between the two. So it's also worth looking at how underexposed the Galaxy S7 is here in this shot, and at some points how overexposed the Nexus 6P is. The LG G5 absolutely nails the exposure in most of this, and the HTC 10 is slightly overexposed in some shots, and a little more overexposed in other shots. But overall, it seems like the LG G5 and the Nexus 6P have some of the better balance. As far as winner for picture quality goes, I personally think the G5 looks best, although I would say the HTC 10 is probably the most realistic, so take that with what you will. Alright, so now we're going to be moving on to a night scene. This one was taken on a construction scene in New York City. This is going to mimic somewhat of like a concert event or maybe some of the late night event where you have obviously dark nighttime surroundings with lots of bright lights in the foreground and different areas around you, where it's going to do interesting different things with the sensor. So right off the bat here in this freeze frame, you're going to notice that the Nexus 6P and the Galaxy S7 absolutely nail the color balance. The sky is black and that's the color it should be. Now the G5 and the HTC 10 seem to get this one a little bit wrong. The HTC 10 gets it a little more wrong. Those are both going to be like a bluish purple sky, and it really didn't look all that much like that, although since this is New York City, there's a bit more ambient light, and it's going to throw off those sensors a little bit more than maybe a darker environment or an inside environment would. So we're going to go ahead and walk here, and you're going to see the different stabilization rates in the different cameras. You're going to notice that the phones with built-in OIS are going to work a little bit better, keeping that video stable, whereas the Nexus 6P, again, is going to be a little bit shakier video because it relies on digital stabilization rather than optical image stabilization. So the optical is obviously a better effect. Now looking at overall video noise, it seems like the 6P has slightly less noise than the other phones. Galaxy S7 comes in second here, and the G5 in third, with the HTC 10 in last with the most noise. There's also a lot of color variation on the HTC 10 versus some of the other phones, so we'll go ahead and freeze frame it again here on some of this construction equipment, and you'll see that the coloring is really very off on the HTC 10. It's kind of got this green look to a lot of these yellows, whereas the Galaxy S7 gets the absolute most correct color in this particular shot, G5 in second, and the Nexus 6P in third, again with this weird kind of green hue to it. So I'm going to go ahead and give the Galaxy S7 the winner here for nighttime video. The G5 and the Nexus 6P probably come in a tie for second because they both have different problems, but about the same amount of problems. And the HTC 10 is going to be in last here with quite a few more problems than the other phones. And last but certainly not least, we're going to be taking a look at some slow motion video here. Now, slow motion has become a big thing in cameras. It didn't really exist on many phones too long ago. Samsung seems to really be the pioneer here with a lot of the slow motion video. They've had 240 FPS in a lot of their phones, all the way back to some of the early Note phones. So we're looking at multiple generations here of slow motion video evolution, and Samsung being able to get a better hold on this maybe than some of the other competitors will. So right off the top again here, we're going to start with the freeze frame. We're going to look at the color balance of all of these. They are absolutely wildly different. Looking at the Nexus 6P, it definitely gets the exposure levels correct, whereas a lot of the other ones are a lot more blown out. You're going to see the blue in the sky, although that grass is super saturated in a way darker, richer green than it actually is in real life. Looking over the HTC 10, that's actually more like what the color of the grass is in real life. Although this shot is quite a bit overexposed and it loses a bit of balance and detail, and particularly the cloud areas up top. The G5 kind of has a weird contrast going on. It looks like it got the color of the sky right, but the clouds are super overexposed, and the shadows in all the trees are super dark, so you really can't see anything in the background there. Whereas the Galaxy S7 did a really good job of balancing kind of between everything as far as color, exposure balance, contrast, everything else goes. So probably going to call this particular contest a tie between the S7 and the 6P, depending on what part of the picture you're looking at. Frame rate differences between the G5 and the other three phones is pretty drastic. The G5 actually only shoots in 120 FPS versus the 240 FPS on the other phones. Now, it seems like the Galaxy S7 has the most clarity of all. It's got the most detail, particularly in the grass and in the birds. 6P is going to come in second. The HTC 10 I think only comes in third because of the exposure issues. And the last place is going to be the G5, which looks like it's a little bit lower resolution than some of the other phones are. They're all 720p video, so unless this one is rendering a little bit lower in the background, they all should be the exact same resolution. Now we'll take a look at two other scenarios here. First up is going to be my rabbit on the porch. Now sorry about the mess, rabbits like to shred paper, so I didn't have a chance to clean it before I filmed this video. My apologies. Now the biggest thing you're going to notice here is of course the exposure and the contrast levels. The G5 is way off here. It's super dark. It's super high contrast. You can barely even make her out with the sun in the background, although you can see a lot more background detail, versus the HTC 10 is kind of the complete opposite. You can make out a lot of the foreground detail and almost none of the background detail. Right about in the middle, you're going to find the Nexus 6P and the Galaxy S7, although the Galaxy S7 does a better job of balancing the background detail, whereas the Nexus 6P probably does the best job overall of balancing everything. Although I'm going to have to give this to the HTC 10 since, well, the rabbit's in the foreground and that's what's supposed to be in focus anyway, so you're probably going to want to balance your exposure for that rather than the other stuff in the background. Motion-wise, there's not a whole lot of difference between any of them. Again, the G5 should be a lower frame rate, but it doesn't really seem like that in this particular scenario, so we're going to go ahead and not really comment too much on that, although the Galaxy S7 and the G5 do a lot better job with focusing than the HTC 10 or the Nexus 6P do. And of course there was that weird little artifact on the 6P's video which I can't really explain. Probably some weird Google camera bug or something like that. Last up, we're going to take a look at this lizard on the wall. So I'll go ahead again and freeze frame it here just to show you the color differences between all of them. The most accurate ones are going to be the Galaxy S7 and probably the G5 with the Nexus 6P and the HTC 10 in last. 6P is kind of green, the HTC 10 is a little too warm. Balance-wise, the S7 got this one best, and we're going to go ahead and start it and see what the motion looks like on this. Now, what you really don't notice that's really cool on a lot of slow-mo video is that noise. Yes, that was actually the lizard moving. It was not me breathing, but what's really interesting is if I take each channel here and I mute it, you're going to find the G5 has the best audio of all. It's actually the loudest and almost comes in a little distorted, which is crazy given how subtle this sound actually is. So listen to this. And then next up, we're going to have the Nexus 6P, which picks up the sound, but it's a little more muted, just a tad bit, but it's actually not distorted. Next up is going to be the Galaxy S7, which you can hear if you really, really try, but it's really not good enough. It's still very, very subtle. And last up is going to be the HTC 10 with practically no audio at all coming from this thing. So for first place, we're probably going to have to give it to the G5 just because it picks it up the best, but it is a little bit distorted, so if you want a little less distortion, looks like the Nexus 6P might win on that front, although again, it's not quite as loud for those more subtle sounds in slow-mo video mode. We'll go ahead and bring up a daytime photo comparison for you pretty soon. In the meantime though, check out our other photo comparison videos, our Galaxy S7, LG G5, and the HTC 10 content on the site. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're at, we're at. Thanks for watching. Till next time.